5 of my own team members surrounded me. "We all agree you're holding us back," they said together. My manager nodded from the corner. "Maybe it's time you stepped down." I reached into my bag slowly. "Before I do, let me show you something," when they saw it. "Don't pretend you don't understand why we called this meeting." Naira leaned forward, elbows planted on the conference table's surface, her perfectly manicured nails drumming an impatient rhythm. The other 4 team members, Lyall, Vince, Kendra, and Theo, had positioned themselves in a half-circle around me. Their chairs formed a barrier between me and the exit. My throat tightened. The calendar invitation had simply read, "Team alignment mandatory." Now I understood why Ellis, my direct manager, had insisted it be held in the small conference room on the east side of the building. Hardly anyone came here. "We've been talking," Lyall said, adjusting his glasses with a nervous gesture that contradicted his confident tone. "All of us about the problems in the division," Kendra jumped in. "The missed deadlines, the shifting priorities, the constant changes to established processes, the way that clients are suddenly dissatisfied with work they've been happy with for years," Vince added, arms crossed over his chest. Theo, usually the quietest one, delivered the final blow. "The way this division ran smoothly until you arrived 6 months ago." I gripped the edge of my chair, focusing on the sensation of my fingertips pressing into the padding to ground myself. 6 months of working 14-hour days, of inheriting a division that was already failing when I arrived, of discovering layer upon layer of dysfunction buried beneath falsified reports. Ellis finally spoke from where he leaned against the wall. "They came to me 2 weeks ago with these concerns." His mouth curled into something approaching sympathy, but his eyes remained cold. "I told them to document specific incidents first. They've been quite thorough." Naira slid a thick stack of printed pages toward me. "Everything's here. Dates, incidents, impact assessments. We've calculated that your leadership decisions have cost the division approximately 22% in productivity and damaged relationships with 3 key clients," Lyall added. "Not to mention what it's done to team morale," Kendra said, her voice dripping with fake concern. My mouth went dry as I flipped through the meticulously prepared document. Each page detailed an incident, a project delay, a client complaint, a missed deadline, all attributed directly to my decisions. Some were twisted versions of what had actually happened. Others were completely fabricated. "We all agree," Vince said, gesturing to include everyone in the room. "You're the problem here. Your leadership is actively holding us back." Ellis pushed himself away from the wall and approached the table. "The executive team respects decisive action when it comes to addressing performance issues. I've already discussed transition options with HR. Transition options." I finally found my voice. "A lateral move to another division if one will have you," Ellis said, "or a managed exit with a modest severance package. Either way, we need you to step down." For the good of the team, they all watched me. 5 faces showing varying degrees of satisfaction. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. "I see," I said softly. I reached down into my bag and felt around for what I needed. "Before I make any decisions, there's something you should know." Their eyes all fixed on my bag, curiosity momentarily overtaking their hostility. "What I have here will change everything about this conversation," I continued, my hand still hidden, "and everything you think you know about the last 6 months. My name is Marceline Winter. 6 months before that ambush in the conference room, I was brought in to lead the Strategic Solutions division after its previous director left abruptly. The division had been struggling. Missed targets, unhappy clients, and plummeting profit margins. The executive team told me to fix it, whatever it takes. What they didn't tell me was that Ellis had been passed over for the role 3 times. They didn't mention that the team had operated as an unchecked thief for years with Naira, Lyall, and the others carving out personal territories no one was allowed to question. I discovered it all within my first month. Project files with conflicting information, client complaints that somehow never reached higher leadership, budget allocations that disappeared into vague categories like supplemental resources and contingency development. When I started asking questions, that's when the real trouble began. "We've always done it this way" became their mantra. Each time I tried to implement a change, even something as simple as standardizing project documentation, I hit a wall of passive resistance. "Remember my first team meeting?" I asked, looking at each of them in turn. When I asked to see the client satisfaction surveys from the previous quarter, Lyall shifted uncomfortably. He'd been the one to tell me those surveys didn't exist, despite the reference to them in 3 separate executive reports, or when I requested access to the project management system. I continued, looking at Naira. Standard security protocols, she snapped. New directors don't get admin access until their probation period ends. Except that's not company policy. I checked with it. The tricks escalated from there. Critical emails mysteriously rerouted to spam. Calendar invitations for key meetings changed at the last minute without notifications. My urgent projects are somehow always at the bottom of everyone's priority list. I tried addressing it directly. One-on-one meetings with each team member, clearly defined expectations, regular check-ins, nothing worked. 2 weeks ago, I stayed late to finish a presentation for our biggest client. The office was supposedly empty, but voices from the break room caught my attention. I approached quietly, intending to say hello until I heard my name. Marceline won't survive the quarter, Ellis was saying. Not after we present this to the executive team. Are we sure about the timing? That was Theo sounding uncharacteristically hesitant. The Wilson contract renewal is coming up, which will fail spectacularly. Naira cut in. Once I adjust the delivery requirements, she'll take the fall. Ellis will step in to salvage the relationship and will be back to normal, and the report we're compiling on her leadership failures will ensure she can't damage another team. Kendra added, just make sure you're all on the same page for the ambush. Ellis said, no wavering, no sympathy, present a united front. I slipped away unseen, my mind racing. Their plan was already in motion. The Wilson contract was our largest. Losing it would certainly give the executive team reason to remove me. And with Ellis controlling what information reached the executives, I had no direct channel to present my side. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They thought I'd been floundering these 6 months. In reality, I'd been silently gathering information, tracing every anomaly back to its source. I discovered their entire system, how they manipulated numbers, siphoned resources, and kept clients dependent on individual relationships rather than actual results. I just hadn't decided what to do with that information yet. Now, facing their ambush, that decision was made for me. You think you know what's been happening in this division? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You've written your version of events very convincingly. I withdrew my hand from my bag, placing a small object on the table. Not the stack of counter-evidence they expected, just a simple thumb drive. What's that supposed to be? Ellis asked, condescension evident in his tone. Insurance, I replied, and the reason none of you are walking out of this room with your careers intact unless we come to a different arrangement. Naira's confidence faltered for the first time. What are you talking about? 3 months ago, when I realized what was happening, I began my own documentation project. Everything is here. The actual numbers, the manipulated reports, the calendar manipulations, the diverted client complaints. I tapped the drive, including recordings from the break room 2 weeks ago where you all planned this ambush and discussed sabotaging the Wilson contract. Their faces transformed from smugness to shock in an instant. You can't possibly. Lyall sputtered. Illegal. I finished for him, recording conversations I'm not part of. Perhaps that would be for the ethics committee to decide. Along with your systematic undermining of division operations and intentional client mismanagement, Ellis recovered first. This is absurd. Even if you have some context-free recordings, it's your word against all of ours. Who do you think the executive team will believe? I smiled for the first time since the meeting began. That's exactly the question I've been asking myself for weeks, and it's why we're at a crossroads now. I leaned forward. In exactly 1 hour, either this drive gets viewed by the CEO and general counsel, or it doesn't. What happens in this room during the next 60 minutes determines which path we take. Their confidence crumbled visibly as the reality of their situation sank in. The predators had suddenly become prey, and none of them knew how to process this reversal. What do you want? Kendra finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at each of them in turn. These people who'd tried to destroy my career, who'd sabotaged their own division out of pettiness and territorial instinct. That, I said, is what we're about to discuss, and I suggest you listen very carefully. The conference room's atmosphere shifted dramatically, tension replacing smug confidence. 5 pairs of eyes darted between each other, silently calculating individual risk, collective damage, and potential escape routes. Ellis, who moments earlier had been practically gloating, now stood rigid, hands gripping the back of a chair. "You're bluffing," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. I picked up the drive, turning it slowly between my fingers. "Am I? Let's test that theory. I'll call the executive floor right now. I'm sure they'd be interested in why the Wilson contract requirements were secretly modified last week." Naira's sharp intake of breath confirmed my suspicion. She had already begun the sabotage. That's a serious accusation. Lyall intervened, his tone measured, always the strategist, always looking for compromise when direct confrontation failed. "Perhaps we've all been under pressure lately. And save it, I cut him off. I have the original requirements document and the modified version you submitted to the client without approval, time-stamped with the system login that made those changes." I looked directly at Naira. "Yours." Panic flashed across her face. "You can't prove I wasn't authorized." "I can and I have." I pulled out my phone and placed it beside the thumb drive. "What happens next is simple. Either we have a productive conversation about restructuring this division, or I make a call that ends all of your careers. Your choice." Theo, the quiet technical specialist, spoke up unexpectedly. "What exactly do you want from us?" His voice carried none of the hostility from earlier, just resignation and fear. "First, the truth. All of it. Why has this division been deliberately underperforming? Why do client complaints mysteriously disappear? Why budget allocations never match actual expenditures?" I leaned back in my chair. "I have my theories, but I want to hear it from you." The silence lasted nearly a full minute. They exchanged glances, a silent negotiation happening between them. "It wasn't always like this," Kendra finally offered. "When Ellis was acting director, Kendra," Ellis warned sharply. "What?" "She clearly knows enough to destroy us all." Kendra snapped back. "I'm not taking the fall alone. No one's taking any fall if you shut up and let me handle this." Ellis hissed. "Like you handled my promotion?" I asked pointedly. "I know you were passed over 3 times, Ellis. What I don't know is why the executive team lost faith in you." His eyes narrowed. "Ancient history. Not to you. Not when you've spent the last 6 months undermining me at every turn." Vince, who had been uncharacteristically silent, suddenly laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You want the truth? Fine. This division was Ellis's creation. He built it from nothing. Then they brought in that consultant from outside. Becker, I supplied." "Becker," Vince confirmed with a nod. "He spent 2 months evaluating everything, then recommended the division grow by 30% and get direct board reporting. But instead of promoting Ellis to make that happen, they brought in someone new. That new person couldn't hack it," Naira interjected. "Ellis had to clean up the mess while that guy took credit for the division's success. And when he left," Kendra continued, "instead of recognizing Ellis's contribution, they brought in another outsider, then another and another. And now you," Lyall finished. Each time Ellis had to rebuild the division's relationships, processes, and momentum without recognition or reward. "So you all decided to sabotage division performance until the company had no choice but to give Ellis control?" I asked, connecting dots that had eluded me for months. "We decided to protect what worked," Theo said quietly. "The 5 of us built something functional. Every new director wants to dismantle it and rebuild their image." I considered them carefully. Their loyalty to Ellis made more sense now, but it didn't justify their actions. "So, you deliberately tank performance metrics whenever someone new is in charge, then magically improve them when Ellis temporarily takes over during transitions." Ellis finally spoke up. "You make it sound malicious. We simply return to proven methods when allowed to. Methods that coincidentally make the division completely dependent on the 5 of you." I noted no standardized documentation, no transferable client relationships, no transparent processes. "It protects our jobs," Kendra said simply. "At the expense of the company's success and your colleagues' careers," I countered. "The division's potential growth has been stunted for years. The executive team knows something isn't right. It's why they keep trying new leadership." "And now you'll tell them it's all our fault," Lyall said bitterly. I checked my watch. "We have 45 minutes left to decide what happens next. I didn't come in here planning to end your careers today. Then what do you want? Ellis demanded. I laid out my terms clearly. First, the sabotage stops immediately. The Wilson contract returns to its original specifications today. Second, each of you will document your area of the business properly, all the hidden processes, client preferences, historical context. Third, you'll actively support the changes needed to make this division scale. And if we do all that, you'll destroy the evidence against us, Naira asked skeptically. Not exactly, I picked up the thumb drive again. This stays with me as insurance, but I won't use it unless one of you returns to undermining me or this division. Ellis scoffed. So we cooperate or get fired. Some choice. Better than you deserve after what you've done, I replied evenly. And there's a fourth condition. All eyes focused on me. I want to know why the previous director really left. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Their reactions varied. Ellis and Naira stiffened. Lyall looked away. Kendra examined her nails, and Theo stared at the table. He resigned for personal reasons, Ellis said carefully. It's in the company records. I've seen the records. I want the truth. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Theo sighed heavily. We should tell her. It's going to come out eventually. Tell me what I pressed. Jason didn't just leave, Theo said quietly. Ellis gave him a choice. Resign or face an investigation for financial impropriety. My pulse quickened. What kind of impropriety? Ellis interrupted. This isn't relevant to it's completely relevant. I cut him off. Answer the question. Lyall took over. There were certain discrepancies in how some client accounts were being delivered. We discovered them during a routine audit, Kendra added. Ellis confronted Jason privately. And instead of reporting it to compliance or the executive team, you let him resign quietly. I concluded. Why? Ellis and Naira exchanged a look that confirmed my suspicion before either spoke. Because the discrepancies weren't Jason's doing, I said, filling the silence. They were yours, all of you. You set him up, then threatened to expose him if he didn't leave quietly. You can't prove that, Ellis said. But his confidence was crumbling. Actually, I can. 3 weeks ago, I brought in a forensic accountant to review all division billing for the past 3 years. Guess what pattern emerged? Billing irregularities that spiked during each new director's tenure, then mysteriously resolved whenever Ellis temporarily took control. Naira's composure finally broke. You had no authority, too. I had every authority. It's my division now. I let that sink in before continuing. The report is comprehensive and devastating. It shows a clear pattern of deliberate financial manipulation designed to make new leadership look incompetent. So this was all a trap. Ellis said flatly. You never intended to negotiate. I absolutely intend to negotiate. I corrected him. But from a position of complete knowledge, the forensic report gives me options you don't have. Like what? Lyall asked wearily. I could submit it to the ethics committee today. You'd all be terminated immediately. Possibly face legal consequences. Or Kendra prompted when I paused. Or we can implement a different solution. One that addresses the root problem. I stood and walked to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. Let me tell you what I understand about this situation. Ellis built this division and feels ownership over it. The rest of you benefit from the status quo and recent outsiders disrupting it. The company keeps trying new leadership because the division is underperforming. But each new leader fails because you ensure they do. I drew a simple organizational chart. This is the division structure as it exists today. And this, I drew a revised chart beside it, is what it could be. They all leaned forward to see what I'd sketched. The new chart showed the division split into 2 distinct groups with separate reporting lines. That's a completely different structure, Lyall observed. It's a solution that gives everyone something they need, I explained. Ellis, you'd lead the client services team directly with Naira and Theo reporting to you. You'd maintain the client relationships you value and have the recognition you deserve. Ellis's expression shifted from hostility to cautious interest. Lyall, you'd head project execution with Kendra and Vince, reporting to me. You'd implement the standardization and scaling we need for growth. And you? Ellis asked. I'd serve as division director, focusing on strategy, growth, and executive relationships. You and I would be peers in practice with different but complementary responsibilities. Silence fell as they studied the chart and considered the implications. This could actually work, Theo said thoughtfully. It addresses the underlying issues without anyone losing face. Lyall acknowledged. Ellis remained skeptical. And the evidence you've gathered remains with me as insurance that we all act in good faith moving forward. After 6 successful months, we revisit the arrangement. What about Jason? Naira asked. If this all comes out, I've already contacted him, I revealed, watching their expressions shift to alarm. He deserves to know what really happened, but he's moved on to a better position and has no interest in revisiting the past. As long as those responsible are no longer in positions to damage others' careers. The revelation hit home. They hadn't just been undermining me. They'd been systematically destroying careers, possibly for years. We have 20 minutes left, I said, checking my watch. Each of you needs to decide. Are you in or do I make that call? Alice stood suddenly. I need to speak with Marceline alone. I need to speak with Marceline. The others looked uncertain, but he gestured toward the door. Give us 5 minutes. As they filed out, tension hung in the air. Whatever Ellis planned to say next would determine everything, not just for me, but for all of them. Once the door closed, Ellis turned to me with an expression. I couldn't read. You think you've figured it all out, he said quietly. But there's something you're still missing, something crucial. My heart rate accelerated. What's that? His eyes locked with mine. Deadly. Seriously. The real reason the executive team keeps bringing in outsiders and why they'll never let this division succeed. Ellis's words hung in the air between us. I maintained my composure despite the sudden twist. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice neutral. He moved closer, lowering his voice despite us being alone. The executive team isn't trying to fix this division. They're setting it up to fail systematically. That makes no sense, I countered. Why bring me in with a mandate to improve performance if they want failure? Because success would threaten them. Ellis's eyes gleamed with an intensity I hadn't seen before. 3 years ago, this division developed an approach that dramatically outperformed every other unit in the company. Our metrics were so good that board members started asking why other divisions couldn't replicate our results. I processed this information, fitting it against what I already knew, and that threatened the executive team's control narrative. Precisely, the CEO's inner circle gets astronomical bonuses based on company-wide improvement initiatives. If one division suddenly demonstrates better methods without their input, their value proposition diminishes. I finished. So instead of celebrating your success, they dismantled it, Ellis said bitterly. They brought in Becker, who recommended expansion and direct board access. Then they systematically sabotaged those recommendations by installing new directors with impossible mandates. And you responded by sabotaging those directors, I noted, playing right into their hands. Ellis paced the small conference room. What choice did we have? Every new director came with the same playbook. Dismantle our processes. Implement standardization that destroyed what made us effective. Report directly to executives who buried our innovations. I leaned back in my chair, reassessing everything I thought I knew. Why? Tell me this now. Because your plan might actually work, he admitted reluctantly. The split structure could give us enough autonomy to preserve what matters while giving you the standardization the executives demand, but they'll never approve it. You don't know that. I've been here 12 years, Marceline. I know exactly how they operate. A knock at the door interrupted us. Lyall poked his head in. 5 minutes are up. We need to decide. The others filed back in, face tense with uncertainty. Well, Naira demanded. I stood, addressing the room. Ellis has shared some additional context about the division's history. It complicates things, but doesn't change the fundamental choice before us, which is, Kendra asked, whether we work together to implement this new structure, or I submit the evidence I've gathered and let the chips fall. Ellis rejoined the group, his expression unreadable. I've told Marceline my concerns about executive resistance to structural changes. They'll never approve it. Naira agreed immediately. We've suggested reorganization before. I checked my watch. 10 minutes left to decide. I need an answer from each of you. Are you willing to try this new approach, or should I make that call? One by one, reluctantly, they agreed to my proposal, with Ellis being the last and most hesitant to commit. I hope you know what you're doing, he said as our deadline approached. The executive team isn't going to simply approve this because you ask nicely. I don't expect them to, I replied, gathering my things. which is why I've scheduled a division presentation for next week. We'll have exactly 5 days to prepare a unified proposal for the new structure, complete with implementation plans and projected outcomes. 5 days isn't enough time, Theo protested. It's all we have, I countered. And it's 5 days, more than any of you deserve after what you've done. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. True to their word, with the threat of exposure hanging over them, my team worked diligently to document processes, restore client relationships, and develop the restructuring proposal. Ellis proved surprisingly valuable, offering insights into executive thinking and potential objections. By the night before our presentation, we had created a compelling case for the division split. The atmosphere had shifted from hostile to cautiously collaborative, though I remained vigilant for signs of sabotage. This might actually work, Lyle admitted as we reviewed the final slides. The numbers support our approach, and the client testimonials you secured are persuasive. Don't get ahead of yourself, Ellis warned. I know these executives, they hate disruption to their power structure. I stayed late that night, refining our presentation and strategy. As the office emptied, I found myself alone with my thoughts and doubts. Ellis's warnings echoed in my mind. What if he was right? What if the executives were deliberately undermining this division? The next morning arrived with unexpected developments. First, our presentation was moved from the regular conference room to the main boardroom. Second, attendance was expanded to include not just the executive team, but several board members as well. This isn't good, Ellis muttered as we sat up. They're bringing in heavy hitters to shut us down publicly, or they're taking our proposal seriously, I countered. Though uncertainty gripped me, the executives filed in, followed by 3 board members I recognized from company materials, but had never met in person. The CEO entered last, nodding curtly in our direction before taking his seat. Miss Winter, he began without a preamble, I understand you've prepared a proposal for restructuring your division. Please proceed. I launched into our presentation outlining the current challenges, our proposed solution, and the projected benefits. Ellis and the team contributed sections on implementation and client impact, presenting a unified front despite their previous resistance. Throughout it all, the executives remained stone-faced, occasionally whispering to each other. The board members watched with inscrutable expressions, taking notes but offering no feedback. When we finished, silence filled the room. Finally, the CEO spoke. This is an interesting approach, Miss Winter. Creative, certainly, but I'm not convinced it addresses the fundamental issues in your division. With respect, I replied. The fundamental issues have been misdiagnosed. This restructuring directly addresses the actual problems we've identified. And what problems are those exactly? One board member asked, leaning forward. Ellis tensed beside me, clearly expecting disaster. This was the moment of truth, a clash between innovation and standardization. I answered carefully. This division developed approaches that dramatically outperformed company benchmarks 3 years ago. Rather than being celebrated and scaled, those innovations were gradually dismantled through leadership changes and process standardization. The executives shifted uncomfortably. The CEO's expression darkened. That's a serious accusation, he said. It's not an accusation, it's an observation, I clarified. And the solution isn't to choose either innovation or standardization. It's to create a structure that supports both. The same board member who had spoken earlier turned to the CEO. Isn't this precisely what the Becker report recommended 3 years ago? A structure that preserved innovation while allowing for scaling. The CEO's jaw tightened. Becker's recommendations were considered but deemed impractical at the time. Perhaps we should reconsider them now, another board member suggested mildly. The tension in the room was palpable. Something unspoken was happening between the board members and executives, something I couldn't quite decipher. If I may, I interjected. We've prepared detailed implementation plans that address the concerns raised about the original Becker recommendations. I nodded to Lyle, who distributed additional materials we had prepared. As the document circulated, the board members bent their heads together in quiet discussion. Finally, the board member who had first spoken addressed me directly. Miss Winter, how long have you been with the company? 6 months, I replied. And in that time, You've managed to diagnose long-standing structural issues, develop a comprehensive solution, and unite a previously divided team behind it." He nodded appreciatively. "That's rather impressive," the CEO interjected. "While Miss Winter's initiative is commendable, I'm concerned about disrupting established reporting lines and accountability structures. Are those the same structures that have led to this division underperforming for 3 consecutive years?" The board member countered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ellis and my team exchanged nervous glances, sensing the power struggle unfolding before us. "Perhaps," the board member continued, "we should discuss this more thoroughly in our executive session this afternoon. In the meantime, I believe we've taken enough of Miss Y team's time." As we gathered our materials to leave, the board member approached me. "Excellent work, Miss Winter. I'd like to continue this conversation soon. My assistant will be in touch." The next 48 hours passed in uncertain limbo. No word came from the executive team or board. Ellis grew increasingly pessimistic. "They're consolidating against us," he predicted grimly, preparing a counter-narrative that makes us look incompetent or insubordinate. But on the third morning, everything changed. An email summoned me to the CEO's office immediately. Alone, when I arrived, I found not just the CEO, but the 3 board members from our presentation. "Miss Winter," the CEO began, his tone carefully neutral. "After considerable discussion, the board has made some decisions regarding Strategic Solutions Division." My heart pounded as I prepared for the worst. Had my gambit failed, would Ellis's predictions prove accurate? "Your restructuring proposal has been approved." Effective immediately, he continued, the words clearly difficult for him to say with one significant modification. "What modification?" I asked cautiously. "Instead of remaining a division within the current structure, Strategic Solutions is being elevated to a direct board reporting business unit with you as executive director." Stunned, I struggled to maintain my composure. "I appreciate the confidence, but it's not just confidence," the lead board member interrupted. "It's recognition of what you've accomplished in identifying and addressing long-standing issues that others either missed or ignored." His gaze shifted meaningfully to the CEO, whose expression remained carefully blank. Furthermore, the board member continued, "We're implementing a company-wide audit of divisional performance metrics and leadership effectiveness. The board feels we've been insufficiently engaged in operational oversight." The implications were clear. The power dynamic I'd stumbled into went far beyond my division. There was a larger struggle between the board and executive team, one that my proposal had unexpectedly influenced. The CEO handed me a folder. "The details of your new position and responsibilities. You'll report directly to the Board Oversight Committee effective immediately. The rest of your team will be notified this afternoon." As I left the meeting, processing what had just happened, I found Ellis waiting anxiously in the hallway. "Well," he demanded, "how bad is it?" I handed him the folder. As he scanned the contents, his expression transformed from dread to disbelief. "This is impossible," he murmured. "They're actually implementing it with board reporting, with modifications," I replied. "You'll still lead client services, but now as a director rather than a team lead. Better title, better compensation." Ellis looked up from the documents, studying me with new respect. "How did you pull this off?" "The executives have blocked every attempt at restructuring for years." "I didn't just present a plan," I said quietly. "I brought evidence." His expression sharpened. "What evidence?" "Everything. The performance manipulation, the systematic undermining of new leaders, the client billing discrepancies, and most importantly, direct comparison of division performance before and after the executives began interfering 3 years ago." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You used us to get to them. I used the truth to fix a broken system. I corrected the thumb drive I showed you in the conference room. It contained a lot more than recordings of your breakroom planning session. It had 3 years of forensic analysis showing exactly how, and when this division was sabotaged from above and from within. You played us all," he said, voiced somewhere between admiration and resentment. "I did what was necessary." I took back the folder. "The question now is whether you can be part of the solution moving forward." Ellis was silent for a long moment. "You know what? I think I can. This is actually what I wanted all along." recognition of our methods, and direct reporting that bypasses the executives who tried to bury us. Then let's go tell the team. As we walked back to our division, now a business unit, I felt the weight of the last 6 months lifting. The ambush in the conference room had indeed changed everything, just not in the way my team had planned. They had tried to corner me, pressure me, force me out. Instead, they had given me the perfect opportunity to implement the changes I'd been methodically preparing for months. Sometimes, the most effective revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's transforming them into allies while removing the real obstacles to success. My team thought they were the predators that day in the conference room. They never realized they were merely pawns in a larger game, one where I had been collecting the right pieces all along. The look on the CEO's face when the board overruled him was worth every late night, every undermined project, every moment of isolation I'd endured. He had protected a broken system that rewarded his inner circle. Now that system was being dismantled, one division at a time, starting with mine. That's the thing about corporate politics. The worst enemies aren't always the ones in front of you. Sometimes they're the ones signing your approval forms and smiling at company gatherings. My team had targeted me because I was the visible authority figure, never realizing we were all victims of the same dysfunctional system. Now that system was changing, and we would all rise together, except for those who had created it in the first place.